don't subscribe to Andrew Tate. You have a hole in your heart, and no amount of money, women, adventure, extremism is going to fill that hole.
In this episode of Men's Therapy Podcast, we're diving into a transformative conversation with Lucas Crump, co-founder of Everyman. Lucas's journey from a boy in Kansas to a leader in men's emotional wellness is nothing short of inspiring.
I believe it takes a certain level of integrity to admit to yourself that you're powerless to drugs and alcohol.
Men are hurting and we're more vocal about it in a way that we really haven't been before.
Have you ever felt like you're checking all the boxes, career success, relationships, but still feel a void? Lucas knows that struggle all too well. After facing profound personal losses and a mental health crisis, he discovered the power of vulnerability and authentic connection among men.
We've neglected men and boys for a very long time. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Like, you have to find a community of men that is equally committed to their own growth as you may be. And the byproduct of that will be that you'll make deep, meaningful relationships with other guys.
Join us as we explore how embracing our true selves can lead to deeper fulfillment and community. Get ready for insights that could change your life.
There's a lot of men that are boys, and there's a lot of boys that are men. If we feel like we belong, we're less lonely.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Mark Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Azoulay, and I'm here with Lucas Crump. He is the co-founder of Everyman. It's an organization very similar to MTO. They offer retreats, they offer groups, they offer individual work where they're helping guys become the best versions of themselves. Lucas, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So I would like to start with your personal story. Like, what got you into doing men's work?
If I was to go way, way back, I was born and raised in Kansas. So that's where I grew up. And I was very fortunate to be able to go to an all-boys Jesuit school. And at that school, we kind of, as a function of the curriculum, we did various sort of religious retreats. And I always sort of gravitated towards that space of vulnerability, connection, authenticity, kind of discussing the bigger questions in life. So I was always very comfortable in that space. At the same time, my parents got divorced when I was young. There was some abuse in my family. It was it wasn't smooth sailing, so to say. And so after college, I actually left Kansas. I moved overseas, and I spent 10 years living and working overseas. And while I was overseas, my biological father passed away. My grandmother passed away, and my grandfather passed away. My grandparents were very influential in my life growing up. As a single mom, they were very involved. I was in this interesting juxtaposition of living and working abroad and having this incredible life experience, but also feeling very homesick. For a long time, in order to sort of continue on this adventure, if I was to look back, I'd say I was probably running away from some things that I needed to deal with related to my father. But, what I did was I was really kind of able to disconnect my head and my heart in order to continue pursuing this experience. So much so that when I experienced those three people passing in my life, I didn't actually go home to their funeral. I actually just stayed overseas and kind of accepted it as it was. Fast forward a number of years after that was when I really, it actually kind of culminated. My grandparents passed away, and then my father passed away. And, I really kind of pushed away from the grief from that loss. And I didn't go to the funeral, and I was living in Singapore at the time. And, it was probably about 6 weeks after his death that I woke up in the middle of the night, in a full panic attack. And I really felt like my heart was kind of erupting, like an emotional kind of volcano, if you will. I had never experienced such intense emotions. And, the result of that was me actually going to a mental hospital and taking some time to really figure out like, wow, what's going on? And the reality is that I had disconnected my head and my heart for a very, very long time. And, you know, that only works for so long. And so, you know, that was a real awakening for me, you know, to really start to do some inner work on myself. That work ultimately led me back to the US. And, you know, I moved to New York City and joined an early stage technology company after I went to business school. And, you know, I kind of just did all the things that I thought I should do as a man after that sort of 10 years abroad living in New York City. So yeah. I was like, okay, well, I graduated business school. So now I should move to New York and get a job with a tech startup, and did that. And the tech startup went like this, and then the company got acquired. And, you know, I sort of did all these things that I thought I should be doing as a man, you know, and there was a real culminating moment when I was probably 37 years old when the company I was working for was acquired. And, you know, I benefited from that. And I thought that the financial benefit that came from that was actually going to bring me the level of sort of fulfillment and happiness that I had been looking for in my life. And when it didn't, I actually got pissed. I was like, what? Like, you know? And I can remember sitting in my parents live in Arizona now, and I had gone down to see them. And my parents, I asked my mom, I was like, Mom, I think I need to come down for the weekend and just kind of chill out a little bit. And I'd love to see a therapist if you know anybody. And so she asked somebody, and they got me an appointment at a therapist. And I'll never forget it. I walked into this guy's office, and he said to me, you know, I explained what was going on. And he said, look, like, you have a hole in your heart, and no amount of money, women, adventure, extremism is going to fill that hole. And at the same time, your dad wasn't around. So you're going to have to be your own dad. You're going to have to grow yourself up. And so he's like, he's like, you're going to just have to decide if you want to do that. And so I went back to New York City, and I was like, oh, God. And that's when I started this sort of real exploration of like, well, what's going on? What's the deeper part of this? And that ultimately led me to AA. So I sober, you know, I decided to go sober, and, you know, it was an incredible experience. I learned very quickly that, you know, drugs and alcohol weren't kind of my problem, so to say. But I had an immense amount of empathy for the individuals that had gone through that experience. But I also felt myself kind of being an imposter. But what I loved about the recovery community was just the honesty and the authenticity of the men there. And I very quickly was like, well, where can I find this? So I started looking around for other men's organizations, and to be honest, everything that I found was kind of woo-woo or spiritual, or guys wanted me to tell me how to be a man or this or that. And, you know, I can remember saying to myself, like, hey, we're just the everyday dudes, just like me, that are kind of going through shit and want to figure things out. And I didn't find it. But what I did find was my co-founders of Everyman, and that led to the first, they were actually already in planning of a retreat, and I joined that retreat. And shortly after that, we decided to formalize the organization, and it's been kind of off to the races since then.
Yeah, there's so much in that story that I want to dig into. I guess I want to start with kind of what you said, right? It's like you did everything right and you were still unhappy. And I think that is so much of the lie that's told to men, is the idea that, like, if we get enough merit badges of whatever our thing is, equals emotion. And for a lot of guys, then equals love, right? We'll finally be loved. We'll finally fill that hole in our heart that I think that therapist was like right on. Can you say more about that kind of thing that happens to guys? And if there's a listener out there that might be feeling that they're on that track, how would they know?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I think I can speak from my own personal experience. I mean, I know, you know, I grew up in Kansas. My father wasn't around. My grandfather was the most influential male figure in my life, and he was a family doctor. You know, I can remember asking him, like, hey, you know, maybe I should become a therapist. And he's like, oh, don't do that. You know, like, you won't make any money. You'll struggle. You know, no offense, but like, yeah, but it was such an interesting thing of like, wow, okay, so then what should I do? I should just go to college and get a job, and then the aspiration behind getting the job should be, getting a bigger job. And then, after I went to business school, it was like, okay, now you have your MBA. So now you have to have a really big job. And, if you have a big job, then you make a lot of money. And if you make a lot of money, then you have to have expensive things and beautiful women. And it was like, I don't know, nobody told me any different. So that was the path that I followed, thinking that path was going to provide me the level of fulfillment and meaning that I was looking for. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't terrible. I'm very proud of the work that the companies that I've worked for and how I contributed, and certainly what I've been able to provide for myself in my life. But what I know is I didn't have a why. I didn't have a motivation for the things I was doing, and if you don't have a motivation, then it's like, well, what are you striving for, right? Like, why am I investing my time into this thing? And so I think, what I would say to guys out there is like, one of the things that we do at Everyman, and one of the things that I've done in my own life, is like listen to that innate part of you, and be honest with yourself in terms of like what you want and what brings you fulfillment and joy. Because I'm not so crazy as to say, just do what you love and everything will work out. No, like, you have to be practical. But I do think that the byproduct of doing things that bring you a deeper level of meaning and purpose in your life will be that you will earn and attract things that will make your life feel valuable or wealthy, or whatever you want to, whatever adjective you want to use there.
Yeah, totally right. And I think it's like, you'll work hard at the things that you care about. It won't require as much willpower and white knuckling, which some of the guys I work with, they're just in white knuckle all the time. Very similar to your story, just like waiting for that payout whenever that will or will not happen, right? But they're just so attached to like the outcome, and they're just like dying right on the inside, just trying to get there. Yeah,
no. And I mean, it's funny, my older brother, then I've kind of struggled with this my whole life, but I was talking to him recently, and he said, Lucas, you're unconventional. Mm-hmm. And every time you try to be conventional, things don't really work out. So why don't you just embrace being unconventional, whatever that looks like? And there's a lot of joy in getting to that place of acceptance that, hey, my path, my life doesn't have to look exactly like everyone else's. Not that there's anything wrong with whatever path somebody's chosen to take, but I think it is important to follow your own path and understand why you're doing the things you're doing and what your motivations are.
Yeah. So I'm curious to go to another part of your story. You talked about being in AA. I'm also in recovery. And I had a very similar experience of seeing older men talk with vulnerability, openness, and just like realness that I just had never experienced in my life. I did AA for like a couple of years, and I'm just getting into therapy and men's groups and men's work, because similarly, like, my addiction, it was hard, but I got over it. And I was like, oh, there's all this other deeper shit I need to actually work on. Childhood trauma, place in world, life meaning, et cetera, right? But I am curious, like, when you encounter those mentors, what were some of the qualities that you saw in them? And I would imagine that it was even more poignant since your dad wasn't in your life in a way.
The word that comes to mind is like integrity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the resonance that comes with integrity, because I believe it takes a certain level of integrity to admit to yourself that you're powerless to drugs and alcohol, and the freedom that comes in that admission is that you can now be integrous in your life. And so I think I was very attracted to that, because I think my father was not. He sort of projected a person on the outside and on the inside, and, behind closed doors, he was a very different person. And so I got the message that that's how you should live. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, I worked very hard to kind of put myself in a situation where I could project a certain image of myself, to feel good about myself. And I think I was very quickly, that's a heavy burden to carry, right? And I think in the rooms, so to say, just the raw honesty was something that I was very attracted to. It's something that I appreciate it. I mean, I will say that, you know, again, it didn't take me very long to realize that drugs and alcohol weren't my thing. You know, like, and don't get me wrong, like, drugs and alcohol have caused me a lot of struggle, and, you know, I've done a lot of stupid things as a result of my relationship with those things. But what I learned very quickly was like, wow, that there's a mechanism in one's brain that sort of tells them to stop. Mm-hmm. And some people have that and some people don't, right? And I developed a tremendous amount of empathy for the people that don't. And I realized very quickly that, like, I have a lot of work that I need to do, but I think I can manage this area of my life if I do the work in the other area of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like I said, I highly respect AA and all that stuff. And very similarly, like, I think it's good for getting people sober, right? For, like, it's really, really effective for dealing with that one specific issue. And I think especially as, like, a young person, or, I mean, really anybody, to meet other sober people, I think that's huge. Because, like, especially if you're trying to, like, still get laid, right? Or still party, or still, like, have fun in any way, shape, or form. I've seen so many people fail in their recovery because, you know, they stop drinking, but then they just, like, don't leave their house.
Yeah, they don't leave their house. Well, and I think that, you know, the other, you are very correct. AA is incredibly good at the one job that it has to get you to stop addictive behavior, which is causing you harm in your life. I think one of the struggles that AA, and I don't believe that once an addict, always an addict. I know too many men that have been through recovery that have moved way past those rooms, and, you know, they're not white knuckling it. You know, they're living a life that's deeply fulfilling. And I think there is a lot of people in the rooms that are white knuckling it, and I have empathy for them. You know, because I wonder, like, what would it look like to actually not be bound by this sort of label as an addict?
Yeah, I agree completely, right? Like, I think the dry drunk kind of stereotype, right? Someone who's like, you know, yeah, they're not drinking, but their whole life is still about drinking.
Right. They're still angry, you know?
Yeah. So I want to, you know, so you kept going deeper, right? It sounds like you went to, like, some childhood wounds. You did some, I'm sure, like, malinitiation stuff. You mentioned retreats. So talk a little bit about that. Like, what was the deeper layer for you?
Well, it was interesting because going back on that story, you know, when I was 31 years old living in Singapore, I literally had a mental breakdown, an emotional breakdown. I ended up in a mental hospital. And I think I'd always known that was, like, I think I always knew that was possible, but I was always strong enough to kind of hold it at bay until I couldn't. And that was a real wake-up call for me. And, you know, living and working overseas in Asia, like, you know, traditional kind of, cognitive-based therapy isn't something that's as accessible in, you know, Singapore as it is in the US. And so I immediately went to sort of explore various types of retreats and meditation and you know, mindfulness. You know, did the Hoffman process and learned to meditate, and, you know, tapped into, you know, Buddhism and different types of spirituality, like, because those were the tools that like were available to me, and I needed to take care of myself, right? And so I had already kind of started down this path of, you know, self-discovery and exploration, which is ultimately what led me to have that deeper conversation with myself when I walked in that therapist's office. I was like, wow, I've done some work here. I need to do some more work, but, like, what more do I need to do? And so at that first retreat, that was particularly powerful for me, was I was blown away by how blown away the other men there were, because in my, you know, that first retreat, it was deep, but it was nothing like, going and spending, 2 weeks at the Meadows or something like that and doing deep inner child work and all of these things. So I was really blown away. Like, wow, this, like I didn't understand that other men had not done things like this. Does that?
Oh, it does. No, I'm just nodding because I've had the same experience, right? Where somehow I was trained in Buddhism and I've done tons of retreats and things. And, from the retreats that we facilitate, I'm sure the ones you see too, it is humbling of like the amount of pressure so many guys are under, right? Like the pressure cooker that you talked about that ends you up in that mental hospital for me, resulted in a crazy addiction, right? It's like so many, do you have dudes like, I mean, I was starting this work in my 20s. You said you started in your early 30s, but it's like some guys hold it until their 50s and 60s, and that pressure cooker is like still cooking.
Still cooking, yeah.
And they've never had any kind of attention paid to it, right? And
I would say, like, I even started mine in, like, as a teenager. Like, I knew, when I was at this all boys school, like, I knew that, my high school was able to create a safe space for me to feel safe based on my upbringing to emote and express myself. I had never experienced that. If anything, my sort of
experienced that even to this day, right?
Right. And so, like, I'd already started that work, and then fast forward, like, almost 15, 20 years later, it was just it was mind blowing to me, and it was very motivating because, one of my core values as a man is to be of service, right? And when you come back to that why, right? Like, why are you doing things? It's like, well, I know that when I'm of service, it provides me a level of fulfillment and meaning in my life that transcends, financial gain. And so I sort of saw this opportunity of like, wow, we could create and build something that allows me selfishly, but also others, to be of service to each other.
Yeah, and have like a real connection, right? Like be in the real world talking about real shit with real people versus I think living in like the game that I think you were in before, right? Kind of like you said, the money, status, power, social media, whatever game, right? Being like, no, I'm just like sitting with a guy actually changing someone's life.
Totally. I mean, I just believe that I'm always very curious of like evolutionary biology, right? And just like this meat suit that we're in, how does it actually like work, right? And I believe that we have a mechanism that is part of our being, part of our DNA, that when we are of service without expectation of return, we were programmed to feel happy and full and satisfied and purposeful. Like, that's how it works, right? Like, and so it's like, how do you actually tap into that? It's like you can make all the money you want in the world, and you can give away all the money you want, and do all those things, but like, there's something visceral and lasting that happens when you are of service to another human being.
Right. We got oxytocin. Right? We have like a whole neurotransmitter, like an entirely separate brain chemical that is just about connection with others. Like, it is hardwired as deep as you can go.
Yeah, we're mammals. We're hardwired to connect. I mean, it's and I think so much of our struggle as men comes back to that we sort of deny our evolutionary biology, right? And you look at from the fields to the factory, right? Like, as we moved out of sort of communal living and harvesting and into a more industrialized world, and what that meant, like in many ways that was a denial of our evolutionary biology, of this need to live and be in community and connection with others.
Yeah, let me ask you about that more directly, right? Because kind of back to the pressure cooker idea. When a guy gets this, right, when they go to a men's group, when they end up in a retreat, when they do self-inquiry, right, I see them that they're so hungry for it, right? It's like that drop of water that they've never had. And they're like, oh my God, Like, I can't believe I'm finally getting this connection. And yet, right, so many dudes are resistant or terrified of it, right, or disgusted by it. Like, what do you think that's about? Like, what are some of the barriers that you think prevent guys from getting it? Whereas, probably similar to me, like every guy that I've witnessed getting it loves it. Like, nobody has been like, get me out of here, right? Most people are like, this is incredible. Whereas it's been my whole life.
Yeah, this is true. I think social conditioning has a lot to do with it. Just how we've been raised. How Richard Reeves of Boys to Men talks a lot about social conditioning and how how much of how we were raised goes into our relationship with our sort of inner self. And I also think that there is it's very like, it's very, a man's job is to provide, right? That's part of our jobs. And I think one of the things that happens to men is, when after they graduate college, they get into their life and they get married and they have children and they have jobs and they sort of like put the blinders on and over-index on providing because that's what they're supposed to do. And it's very, like honorable. But in doing so, we sort of don't provide to ourselves. And I think a lot of guys sort of say to themselves, like, I don't need that, or I don't have time, or that's not for me. It's just it's interesting because like I don't actually see a lot of guys that don't show up. I think what's happening in our culture is the conversation is changing, and my hope is that we get to a place where it's like, oh, you don't do that? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a wave coming. I think there's a shadow side when we look at like, Manosphere stuff and Andrew Tate and all that kind of like other side of the coin. But I think men are hurting and we're more vocal about it in a way that we really haven't been before. And I hope that people go to organizations like yours to like get a healthier kind of dose of community and connection.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm look, I don't subscribe to Andrew Tate, but I've always struggled with this word, this sort of idea of like toxic masculinity, because toxic masculinity is kind of describing a set of behaviors that at one point in time were normalized and accepted in our culture, right? And honorable. Yeah. I mean, I can get you a copy of, Red Book magazine from 1950 that says like a woman's only job is to like find a husband at work and a guy's job is to, play golf and, make money. Like, I don't, it's just like, whatever that was accepted. I think that Andrew Tate, he has an expression of masculinity. I don't subscribe to that expression of masculinity, but I think we have to be careful defining a certain type of masculinity and saying that's good and that's bad, right? Again, not for me. I don't agree with him, but I also look at the people that he has attracted and I wonder, wow, what if you could show them a different way, without necessarily having to make him wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't have to build on more like of hatred and aggression, right? But I agree. I think the point I'm making is like, I think the reason he has so many followers is because men are struggling with loneliness. I think they're feeling disenfranchised. I think they're feeling invisible. I think they're feeling like very angry. And I think there's a lot of suffering.
Well, I think the reason why he has a lot of followers in my opinion is like, we've neglected men and boys for a very long time. Like, and quite honestly, like, the wellness industry or, whatever category you want to put every man in, like, it's like, oh no, this is only for people on the coast, right? And it's like, I say bullshit, like I'm from Kansas and like every man is for every man. And yeah, we have a lot of guys in New York and LA and San Francisco and all these different places. But like, what lights me up is when a guy from, Kansas or Nebraska or, Arizona, Montana finds our work and, taps into this community. I think it's a misnomer to think. What I always say is that, like, who doesn't want to feel better? Like, who doesn't want to be well? Like is wellness something that has to be kind of, is exclusive to a certain type of person, or that has a certain socioethnic background or whatever? No, I disagree.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. Yeah, for sure. Right. And I think, like, my industry, frankly, the psychotherapy industry, has really failed men. Toxic masculinity was defined by my industry, right? The APA put out a report in 2010 about that. And basically it was just really like pathologic, right? It was making these things almost a disorder. Right. And there was nothing in that report. And Richard Reeve talks about that in his book of Boys and Men too. Like, there was nothing about a healthy masculinity. There was no counterpoint. It was just like an attack on traditional masculinity versus being like, we need to, maybe evolve it, or we need to have a healthier version, or here's some needs that men have. It was like horrible. I mean, it was a horrible report. And I think my industry hasn't quite recovered from that.
Well, I would agree. I also think that, one of the struggles is that, unfortunately, the profession of psychotherapy is predominantly women, but yet men, men have the majority of the problems, and so, and I think that's very characteristic of what has happened to men, because if you think about, like, who taught you about emotions and who taught you about emotional expression, it most likely came via a feminine lens. Your mother, a teacher, a school nurse, because those were those were our caregivers. So, like, our expression of emotionality has a feminine lens on it, right? And it's like, well, no, how do we have masculine emotional expression? Right? Like, how do we learn as men to express ourselves from a vulnerable place and have that not be a sign of weakness, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're on the same page, right? Like, I think it, especially when I look at like millennial generation or younger Gen Xers, right? Like, we're the generation of divorce. So a lot of us didn't have, dads in the home, or we saw our dads on weekends or summers or whatever, right? Like, so there weren't any of those male role models that I think every man does provide, or I think your organization really does do that. And I think it's such a key shift that I'm also doing with my organization, Men's Therapy Online, is like, let's help men become masculine instead of feminizing them. Because I think a lot of the therapy industry tries to feminize men, which is exactly what you're talking about, but we're not actually like masculinizing.
Right. I mean, like, we, I always tell people that, like, I can tell you what every man is not. Every man's not a cult. Every man's not a religious organization. Every man is not a, friend finder for middle-aged guys. Every man is a growth group. It is it's like when you get to an inflection point in your life and you decide that you want to change, you want to grow, you want to be better, you decide that the way you've been doing it isn't working. If the proverb rings true, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Like, you have to find a community of men that is equally committed to their own growth as you may be, and the byproduct of that will be that you'll make deep, meaningful relationships with other guys. But, like, it's not like, oh, woe is me, nor is it like, oh, masculine, hear me roar. You know what I mean? It's just like, no, like, because and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because people ask me all the time, like, oh, what Men are really searching for like their definition of masculinity. You know, and I'm like, no, guys don't wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and be like, what does it mean to be a man? You know, like what we do is we say like, wow, how can I express all the parts of me in the environment that I exist in? Meaning that like if I'm a emotive, soft guy and I work at a bank, like, you know, how can I be soft and emotive, but in an environment that requires me to be a hard ass, you know, alpha? Like, I think that's what guys are struggling with.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think guys feel like you said shut down and cut off, but they're not like, I don't feel like a man, right? I think they right? Like, I think we know that we're men, but we were like, something is missing, right? That's that kind of hole in the heart idea, right? Like I'm unsatisfied, or I feel like I'm putting on a lot of masks. Like I feel like I'm fake. A lot of guys talk about that, and I've certainly felt that. But yeah, they don't ask questions about masculinity.
Yeah, nobody's like, I don't go on walks and ponder my masculinity.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so I think one of the things that Everyman does really great is literally they contact the everyman, you know? So like, how do you reach the guy that, just like you, right, that thinks that some things are way too woo-woo, right? Or that therapy is too feminine or makes them look weak or that they're crazy or whatever, right? I think the guy that is more inaccessible, how do you get to them? How do you pitch the self-improvement journey?
Wow, that's another good question. I would say you know, one of the things that's been core for Everyman is just staying true to our mission. You know, we empower men to live healthy, happy, more connected lives, to feel more purposeful and share wisdom, right? Like that's what we do. And, you know, we lead with our mission and we lead with our values. And yeah, I think one of the things is like, we haven't been, we're not trying to sell anything to guys. You know, it's just like, hey, this is available to you if you want it, right? And I think that's been, you know, one of our, I don't know if that was the answer you're looking for, but that has been, you know, it's like, you know, we had some incredibly talented, smart people from various, you know, aspects of business that have been involved in this organization and have helped us grow and you know, rise to the place that we exist within this space, within this category. And I'm incredibly indebted and appreciative to those men. And, you know, along the way, obviously our work has been recognized, you know, nationally and globally. You know, all the kind of major media outlets have featured us in some way, shape, or form, and I'm incredibly proud of that. But, you know, people always ask me like, wow, how did that happen? And it's like, we just do our thing. You know, like we just stayed true to our mission and did our work and placed that as the highest priority. And that those other things come, you know, like, I think we live in this culture where we're, you know, everybody's trying to sell everybody on something, and it's just like, it's fatigue.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to sniff if that's what's coming, right? That it is a cash grab, or that it is, you know, it's not about your members or your clients, right? It's just about like, can you extract as much value out of them as possible? And everything is that. And I think like wellness is even turning into that. So if you can be a company that isn't that, it's very attractive to people.
Totally. And I think, you know, for us, one of our core kind of principles is like, Everyman is a bottoms up organization, not a top down. And what I mean by that is like, every man that joins this community and participates in our programs has a unique set of experiences, has, you know, unique wisdom that they can offer to this community. Like we are all equals and we stand shoulder to shoulder. Like there's not a guy, you know, that is like, hey, let me tell you how to do it. Like, yeah, we have facilitators that have gone through and trained in, we've certified them to deliver our programs, and we have we have our methodology and what works for us. But every man, like we all walk the same walk, and I think that like in this world, like so many people want to be the guy that has the answers, right? And that's fine. If those guys are helping guys, so be it. That's great. There's a lot of guys that need help. But I do think that there's a lot of guys that want to be part of a community and that want to learn and grow together. That's more appealing.
Yeah. So say more about the community aspect, because, what I tell the dudes that join MTO is like, I'm like, yeah, we're a therapy organization, but really we're a community organization, right? We're kind of like, we're masquerading where we're getting you in with therapy and self-improvement, but really it's about the connection. So how do you foster that? And what do you see the benefits of community?
I mean, the benefits of community are endless, and I hear the word community coming up more and more, especially as we, sort of look at the loneliness epidemic that we're facing. And I guess my response to that would be like, community is not something that you can necessarily buy. It's like if you and I lived in the same neighborhood, and that's a community, right? But like, I could choose to go walk across the street and maybe help you with your yard, or I could choose to, participate in the community, and I would be part of that community, right? Like, or I could just live in that community and not do anything, right? So like, and what I mean by that is like, community is like something that happens organically as a function of one's participation in the community, right? So I think that is very, very important. I mean, we give guys an arena to participate in that community and create the community that they want, right? So I think that is very important. And I also think that guys, when you start this journey, you're sort of looking for like-minded guys, right? And when you find those, you feel at home, right? One of the things that I'm most proud of, and that it just, doesn't matter how long I've been doing this, but it still, makes me giddy inside, is like, when I see a picture of a guy that met another guy from Everyman, and now they're, doing something together or on some adventure, or, that's what really lights me up, is like guys that have created these relationships. Like I said, like the byproduct of their commitment to themselves is deep, meaningful relationships with other guys.
Yeah. And that's what, changes the world. Yeah. I say the same thing. It's like the goal is that you're at each other's, weddings, births, and funerals, right? Like it creates like those long lasting relationships. So I don't know if there's like a question here, but something around intentional community. So I guess like quick story, right? Like, I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, which is very woo-woo, very much about there's intentional communities, there's communes, there's always people that are like trying really hard to like meet the community need, right? Some people are selling it, like you said, some people are trying to do it. And I've seen so many of those fail, and I recently moved to Evergreen, a small mountain town in Colorado, and I'm more connected than I've ever been, because we need each other. Like we literally need to plow each other's driveways. We help each other take down trees. Like we share food. We like take care of each other's pets. Like it is like really close.
And I just feel like that's how we were supposed to live, right? Like that like tribal society. I mean, that's kind of like what we should have been doing. And so it's funny. I live in upstate New York, and a lot of times people come up from the city, and they are closer to nature. They start to slow down. They start to, and they're like, it's a small town, and they're like, I feel good. It's like, well, no, like no surprise there. You know, like this is how you're supposed to live, right? Close to the land, kind of in community. You know, it's not surprising that you would feel better as a result of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the question is like, how do you or how do we create community when you don't have need? Because I think a lot of guys, you know, I think we're very fortunate actually that we live in small towns. I love living in my small town. But I think most people live where they can be alone, right? They can work from home, they can order from Amazon, they can get Uber Eats, right? Like they don't actually need their neighbor in the way that you do when you do live in a small town, especially in like a, you know, hostile environment, right? We're dealing with weather and shit. Like, yeah, how do you do that? Because I've seen that fail so many times, you know, because it's like, what do you bond on?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I think like we should. I think it's really about being cognizant of that, right? Like we have all these forces that are coming at us, right? Like it's just the reality of our life, you know, and so we need, you know, we can choose to be kind of asleep at the wheel, or we can choose to be cognizant of the impact of these things on our life, you know. And I think that like developing that sort of awareness that like, yes, I'm waking up and I'm walking into a world which is going to try to steal my attention, which is going to try to make my life easier for me in order to extract value in some way, right? Like, okay, that's just capitalism in our world. But like, you can choose to allow that to happen to you, or you can actually choose to wake up and say, okay, well, how do I defend myself? What are the things that I need to do differently to feel differently? Do I need to live in a smaller town? Do I need to be more intentional about making time with friends? Do I need to, you know, self-regulate in a different way? Like because like, look, we're not going to defend ourselves from what's coming at us, but we can be aware and we can take a different action.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it makes me think like, what do you think about this idea, right? I think like men grow through challenge. I think the modern man, kind of what you said, like it's all based on ease. Like we don't have challenge if we don't want it. So like as a man, how do you seek out challenge to actually grow?
Well, and I think that's a great question. I mean, you know, lots of societies, different societies. I mean, Native American, you know, they have rites of passage, right? And those rites of passages were intended very specifically to move boys to manhood, you know, so that they could go and hunt and kill food and eat. Like, I don't need to do that now. I can go to Whole Foods and buy my meat there, right? But we still need, you know, so what I guess what I'm saying is like that initiation, I get and I respect and I honor what that was intended to do, right? It was intended to very specifically move young men into a different sort of way of being, right? I think a lot of men, you know, we don't have those rites of passages now, right? And so we don't ever sort of matriculate into we don't ever like matriculate into a space that then gives us the skills needed to navigate the world that we live in now, if that makes sense. I guess, you know, I think men have to be very conscious of saying, okay, cool, like time for me to grow up. You know, the reality is like, you know, one of my teachers said to me once, you know, there's a lot of men that are boys and there's a lot of boys that are men.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it's that kind of like internal emotional age. And I agree. I think like a lot of men don't grow up, and our society is built that we don't have to, right? In the same way you did, whereas, you know, I'd imagine in indigenous societies, like you would die, right? Or starve to death, or whatever, right?
Yeah,
like
you had to learn these
need.
skills. Right.
Yeah.
You had to learn these skills, you know, and the reality is that like, you know, I really feel for young men. Mm-hmm. It was funny, over the summer I was traveling and talking with a friend of mine about like the first time we went to Europe, and, you know, we were saying like, wow, we all had the Lonely Planet, you know, and you learned very quickly that any place that you chose on the Lonely Planet was most likely going to be full because everybody else was going there, right? So you learned to be creative and figure it out, right? But now this, phone robs us of the development of those skills. And so I think we have to be very mindful of like, wow, dude, you can totally be shut down and disconnected from your emotions. You'd probably be fine. You're not going to live a fulfilling, happy, joyful life. So would you want to, you know what I mean?
You'll be just fine, and it makes you think about, your earlier thing about like what men think about when they look in the mirror. And I think it made me think I have another question where I think like guys, they ask like, am I a pussy? Right? Like, I think that's a question. And we talk about initiation. Like, I think another step in it is like proving yourself to yourself, right? Like doing something that you respect, that you think is hard, and overcoming that challenge so that you can look yourself in the mirror and be like, yes, I am strong, right? I am a man. I have done hard things. Because I think as men, we do respect men who do hard things, right? Who do difficult things.
I think we do, but I think that's a dangerous place for us to get into because our culture is filled with these kind of, I call it the superhero syndrome. There's a lot of guys that I can name right now that have awesome podcasts, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, Ader Huberman, those guys are great, right? They're professional entertainers. They get paid to do male stuff and talk about it, right? And that's I listen to all those guys. I respect them, but I also do sometimes find myself like, man, like Joe Rogan's 57, like he's jacked and he like goes and bow hunts like and eats the meat himself. Is like, I don't do that, so like I'm a pussy. I'm like, hold on a second, like Joe Rogan is an entertainer, like he's projecting a version of masculinity. And if I'm going to get into a game of comparing myself to Joe Rogan, like I'm never going to feel very good about myself. And so I just think we have to be very careful about, looking to certain people that are defining masculinity, because it's like you said, dude, whatever you think is hard and you prioritize doing it and it makes you feel fulfilled that you've accomplished that thing, and then like you should do that thing, No,
totally. I agree. Yeah. I don't think it always has to be the kind of, bow hunting, MMA. But I do think like men need to feel like they have overcome challenge in their life,
of course. I mean, of course,
it could be an emotional challenge or a spiritual challenge or whatever.
But I think, I was, on a call yesterday with a guy and he was like, wow, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. Right.
And what we were really doing was actually slowing down, being present to what we were feeling, expressing our emotions in a vulnerable way. And he'd never done that before. And he's like, well, I'm like, that's an amazing initiation. Don't get me wrong. I love Joe Rogan. I love all these guys. I think what they do. And, I actually really appreciate the emphasis that those guys put on emotional growth, inner work, spirituality, and the depth that they're going, because I think they're presenting, I think that they are very sort of what I would call, kind of full spectrum men, right? Where they've sort of connected the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual parts of ourselves to be a healthy, well-rounded man.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what you're talking about is very real. I call it with my guys like the James Bond syndrome. You could have got James Bond, who's like crushing it with women, can drive every vehicle, knows how to kill a man, speaks every language, knows how to gamble, right? Like he's everything. And I think with social media, you can find an expert on everything, and you can always compare yourself to that expert, right? Like, oh, I'm not this gym influencer. I'm not this hustle mindset influencer. I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not this like spiritual teacher. And like, I think we're sold a lie that we could be James Bond, right? We could master every domain.
Right.
I just don't think that's possible.
One of my personal mantras is just, where I am is where I'm supposed to be. It's like trust the journey of your life. And I think one of the things that happens is where you sort of get pulled out of the present moment because of all these things and influences that we could be sort of doing.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that, because as I guess I'm hearing you talk, I hear spirituality, right? And you talked about studying Buddhism. I've also done that. And I think when you get into this work, I've found that like spirituality creeps up at some point, right? Whether it's faith or nature-based practice or Buddhist practice, meditation, whatever it is. But I'm curious for you, is there spirituality in your life, and what role has that played in this work?
I mean, unequivocally. I always go back to I used to sit around the table, Sunday dinners with my grandparents, and my grandfather would always start by saying, "Spirit of the universe." I went to a Catholic school, and I have a lot of, I guess if I could tell a bit of a story, because it is important to me. When I was living overseas, I spent some time in East Africa, and I was trekking to see mountain gorillas, and we came to this very small village that literally, there was a hole for a toilet, and there was a couple of mud huts, and there was a house, and there was a church, and all the people were going to the church that day, and they came out happy, right? They were happy. I interpreted that. And I had this moment of thinking, wow, like if religion or spirituality enables that person to accept the life that they've been given, then it's doing its job. Because I didn't have any control. Like I didn't decide to be born in Kansas, right? Like I got the life that somebody created for me. And so I always come back to that, because it's like, wow, believing in a higher power, believing in a spirituality, and having a sense of mysticism around and world and the universe and how these things have happened allows us to have deeper self-exploration, right? Don't just accept the answer, right? Ask the deeper question.
Yeah, and that's great. And also you're talking about like belonging, right? I feel like you belong not just with a group of guys, which I think is critical to community, right? But I think belonging like on planet Earth, or belonging in the universe, right? This kind of very spiritual sense of belonging and place.
Well, and when people talk to me about loneliness, my response is always it has nothing to do with loneliness. It has everything to do with belonging, right? If we feel like we belong, we're less lonely. And we can belong to planet Earth, we can belong to our family, we can belong to various communities, but it's very important for us to feel like we belong. Spirituality is very, very important to me. Also not accepting kind of a single sort of definition, if you will, like having the autonomy to explore and come to your own conclusions of what spirituality is for you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think spirituality is great. I think religion's great, but I think dogma is the problem, right? And like proselytizing, where it's just about like my way is the only way. In Buddhism, there's a great phrase. It's like, there's 10,000 doors to the Dharma, which is that idea. It's like, you can really go any way. They all lead often to the same place. If you commit, right? I mean, if you really walk the path, you'll get to some of the same realizations.
Right. And I would add to that and just say, one of the things is like, can you show up with a beginner's mind, right? Can you be willing and open to learn and grow?
Yeah. Well, Lucas, we do have to wrap up. This has been a phenomenal episode. It's flew by really, really fast. Love to have you back on in the future at some point. So before we wrap up, I'm curious, where can people learn more about you and learn more about your organization?
Everyman.com, EVRYMAN.com, 1E. and you can find out all about what we do. We offer, groups, programs, retreats. It's all available to our members. We have guys all over the world that participate, actively in our groups every single day. And we run programs on a monthly basis. So guys want to get involved, they can head to the website and join us.
It's a good organization. Definitely check them out. We'll put their information in the show notes, as well as any resources that we've talked about during this time. Books. So I was going to see there for a minute. As well as any books that we've talked about there. Thank you so much for tuning into the episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. If you've liked this, be sure to share it, like it, comment, do all the stuff. Share it with some guy you think needs to hear what Lucas and I have been talking about during this show, and spread the word. Check us out on YouTube, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, all the stuff. We're under Men's Therapy Online. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you another week on an episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.